going on, guys? It's Code Talking Paintball, and today we're going over Shocker's brand new amp. So, kind of just going over the case real quick. Very similar to the XLS case, the faux carbon fiber, pretty solid case in my opinion. We have a quick start guide, barrel sock. We got a 2-piece or 3-piece Freak XL barrel. We have a spare parts kit, a small container of grease, a set of ball-headed Allen keys, and the Shocker amp. So let's talk about the amp and its features. As you can see, the amp carries over a lot of the design language and proportions from the outgoing XLS. The amp right off the bat is still very light and petite. Still has a nice stretched out ergonomics as before, just thin. Speaking of petite, I don't understand what SB was thinking spending the money on the molds for this new front grip. Personally, I find this too thin, so my first mod was to swap it out. And of course we'll swap it out with the XLS grip. That's much better. That feels proper. The back grip has been redesigned as well. Screws are located further in, away from the edge of the grips. The previous XLS and RXS grips had the potential of tearing near the screws, as there wasn't enough material. Along with the screws, they revised the design of the grips and their interface with the trigger frame. The grip now fits tighter to the frame to help fight against water ingress. The rear screen has been updated, also to improve resistance as well. All great updates here. The back grip reminds me of how MacDev has revised the Prime's grips, where they are very tightly fitted to the trigger frame, with routing to redirect the water. Though a great update, my biggest issue is the material or lack of texture. It's borderline hard plastic. It's rather slippery. When these get covered in paint or mud, these are going to be slick. The eye covers are pretty much identical to the previous XLS. You have the mechanical spring-loaded detents, which I've always been a fan of, and the screws are actually threaded into the eye covers, so you don't have to worry about 3 separate pieces like you do with the other markers. For example, a detent, eye cover, and screw. Granted, the spring-loaded detents on the Shockers are comprised of 3 pieces, so you won't be doing these quickly in the field in any manner. The V-neck and ASA are identical to the previous, with some slight milling differences. The OSP has mentioned that a lever ASA will be available as a separate upgrade to buy. The trigger now comes standard with a blade, still probably the best for the mid-tier segment. A simple magnetic brake, it just has great feedback, and the pivot point is just really spot on. As you can see, the trigger guard has been revised as well. The bottom of the guard is now flat and runs parallel with the body. They made this change to make it easier to swap hands. A rather minor change, which in my opinion doesn't look great, but was functional, which I can always respect. A smaller trigger guard should not pose too many issues ergonomically or prevent people from walking the trigger. One of the bigger features that Shocker really wanted to highlight was the introduction of this new frame-to-body connection, which utilizes a pocketed lever connection at the front of the frame and body. A single screw is used to mechanically secure the entire halves together. The only thing I would kind of want to change about this is that I wish this was a captive screw here in the back, so you don't have to worry about it falling out. Just a thought. This with their new frame-to-body connection, there are no more wires tethering the 2 sections together. The solenoid is now secured by a spring clasp. You simply lift the tab, or pull the tab, relieving pressure off the noid, and disconnect the wire connection to the board, and it's free to remove. All of these new features make for an easier breakdown of the marker and swap for those who use the CVO or mech trigger frame. Seems like a roulette when it comes to this trigger frame design. Seems like no matter how careful you carefully move these wires aside, you're always at risk of pinching them, which is a really poor design choice. They really could have done something a little bit better to help prevent this. SP likes to boast how quickly this marker is to swap with the quick release solenoid and single screw, but I still think pointed clips has them beat here. Another issue I have is that if you do pinch the wire at the noid here, because this is so poorly managed, you will have to replace the entire solenoid. Though they are more affordable compared to pointed clips or some of the other manufacturers. I mean, if they just had carefully designed this wouldn't be an issue. You do want to make sure the wires are pulled to the side here, but I'm still noticing that it still gets caught as you're installing the trigger frame. Removal of the amp core takes a quick turn of the back cap and pull out of the body. This turns a cam with these two prongs that interact with a rod in the body. So the installation of the bolt is directional, so be mindful of it. They went with this system as the past push button bolt release had issues where the latches would wear and lead to failures. The bolt would disengage and pop out the back, usually just venting, but had the potential to leave the marker in a hurry. So now to the part we've all been waiting for. The new amp core, Shocker's all-new engine, sort of. Their parent company, DLX, has developed a very similar engine in the Lux X, and well, the X core is based off of the Gamma core from Pointed Eclipse. Now, they aren't identical clones, as some people are like, well, all spools look the same. One, no, and two, these engines function identically to each other, and that's what matters. Breaking down the amp and Gamma core from the Ether 2, you'll start to see the similarities. The amp, I would say, is technically more similar to the Gamma Pro from the CS2. Both the amp and the GP core use a poppet seal at the valve, where the Gamma core uses a spool seal. The advantage of the poppet face is efficiency. Air is more efficiently able to flow. It's a higher end feature and a way to differentiate the Gamma from the Gamma Pro. So as you can see, I'm taking apart the amp here, and the bolt guide likes to get stuck in the can with the bolt because it's friction fitted. Such a poor design. There it is. Like, I don't know. It's just, I find that stupid. I'm not going to break it all the way down to the valve or to the switch because there's just no point. They're there. It is there. So the bolt guide just unscrews off the Gamma core. As you can see, they're quite similar. We have the spool, shaft here, and well, the spring for the spool in the back. Now this comes off for the amp. We have the QEV valve here, but as you can see, they're nearly identical. The amp runs at an operating pressure of 110 to 115 psi. The Gamma core is rated for around 135 and the GP core 105. Just to clarify, operating pressure has to do with volume. The more volume you have in the air chamber, the less pressure. There really isn't anything other than that. People tend to make this a bigger deal than it is. Commonly, people like to say the lower operating pressure, the better it is on paint. Well, that's true. It's very far from the whole story. Paint handling has more to do with the bolt design, bolt acceleration, detents, ball fitment in chamber, and how the pulse of air is delivered to the ball. Lower operating pressure is far from the guaranteeing better paint handling or barrel rise. Take a look at the force. The nucleus engine operating pressure is right around 145 psi, and that has arguably better paint handling than any of the other higher ends. That being said, I do have concerns over the design of the open face bolt on the amp. Though higher flowing, it has the potential to allow smaller paint to have excess room to move inside the chamber, similar to the issues that the DSR and M3 had. Not allowing the ball to settle nicely against the face of the bolt can lead to the bolt smacking the ball rather than push it. Let's take a look at the amount of movement this reball has in the chamber of the amp versus the force. You can clearly see the amount of play the amp has in comparison. Also, I don't believe their implementation of the two-stage bolt acceleration is as successful as PE's. The amount of distance between the 2 points of acceleration is shorter on the amp. This in theory would cause the bolt to move quicker, but time will tell. An additional feature that Shocker added was a QEV valve, or quick exhaust valve, located behind the switch chamber. This pressure sensing diaphragm is used to vent the air from the switch valve chamber. The gamma core and GP core utilize the solenoid to vent the chamber. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure the benefit of it, aside from response, but it's there. In my opinion, it's another item that could get clogged or start leaking. I don't know. I'm far from an expert, but I just make YouTube videos. Side note, the amp core feels cheaper than the gamma core, which is weird to say, but I noticed that the X core feels very similar. There's sort of a cheapness to it in its fit and finish, possibly the quality in anodizing or finish of the aluminum itself. The way the pieces come together are not of the highest quality. For example, like I showed, the bolt guide is friction fitted into the keg and commonly gets stuck in the can. Also, something that really bothers me is the way they did the routing in the bolt. It's very lazy. You see these holes? The pads are drilled down the length of the engine to their appropriate chambers and plugged with rubber. I had one unplug already and had to seal it with a chunk of O-ring and Loctite. Personally, I'm not cool with this. Granted, these would not be earth-shattering to lose since the supply to the air chamber is constant, but if this plug to the rear valve unplugs, the differential in pressure will most likely cause the QEV to intermittently vent. So be careful. Don't remove those plugs and don't damage them. Shocker really should have resolved this better. The shot quality, I have to say, is quite nice. It's like a CS2 and a DSR had a baby. Has a nice soft but quick shot to it. I think a lot of people will really enjoy the way these shoot. I think it shoots quite a bit better than the X and would wholeheartedly shoot the amp over it as well. I really think the X was a cheap imitation to the Gamma Core. Now that the Shocker, DLX, have had their second go at it, you can feel the improvement and progress made. I'm sure the new Lux is going to shoot quite similar to the amp. I hope you guys found this video informative. You guys can expect a technical breakdown of the amp and Gamma Core in the future. Time will tell how it stacks up against the Gamma Core in the long term, and if it will manage to match the workhorse title of the 170R. If you guys have any questions, leave them down below in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.